Well, it took 3 episodes, but Picard is finally in space. This episode, The End is the Beginning, contains a lot of setup, but also a lot of Easter eggs and references to past Trek. Also, I've got a few theories about Soji and the Romulans that I'd like to talk about with you guys in the comments, but I'll get to that later. First, let's look at the flashback where we get a glimpse of Raffi's logistical skills. They don't say it in the episode, but she was Picard's first officer aboard the Titan, as was detailed in the Picard Countdown comic book. In that comic, they wear the same uniforms that we see in this episode.
You were ready with the inventories from Beta Antares and Eridani A, which shut them up.
She mentions Beta Antares, which, according to James T. Kirk, originated a very difficult card game.
On Beta Antares 4, they play a real game. It's a man's game.
Now, this may not be a completely random reference, since the episode also features Romulan tarot cards. And Raffi also mentions Eridani A, a star in the Vulcan system that's also the home of a Federation shipyard. And boy, de-aging has come a long way since X-Men 3, huh? Back to present day when Picard meets Raffi at her home at the Vasquez Rocks. Now, I mentioned this in the last Easter egg video, but just in case you didn't catch it, the Vasquez Rocks are a famous filming location that's been used in Trek several times. The first time was when James T. Kirk fought this Gorn. And speaking of the Gorn, later in the episode, Raffi's screen reads Gorn Egg, which could be some kind of code that means a synthetic. Anyways, I was a little confused by a couple of things here. First, Star Trek is supposed to be set in a utopia. There's no money.
What does it mean, exact change?
But then why is Raffi jealous of Picard's estate?
I saw you sitting back in your very fine chateau.
And she's vaping, and Rios is smoking later on. Gene Roddenberry famously turned down cigarette companies when they wanted to advertise on Star Trek by having the character smoke. And smoking's always been treated with disdain in the shows before.
What's that disgusting smell?
I think it's called tobacco. It's a deadly drug. When used frequently, it destroys the internal organs.
So why are people smoking now? Is it because Star Trek is supposed to be edgy? I prefer how the Orville treated smoking.
I don't know what's going on here, but we are all going to sickbay right now.
For what reason?
Nobody on Earth has smoked for hundreds of years.
And then Picard meets his new pilot, Rios. He has a shard of titanium stuck in his shoulder. This is the harder-than-diamond metal that's used to build starships. He's reading Tragic Sense of Life by 20th century Spanish philosopher Miguel de Unamuno. Now, I have not read this book, so I looked it up. Basically, he says that living your life logically is pointless because we're all going to die someday, so we should live with passion. The book also talks about how, since we know we're going to die, people struggle foolishly to leave a legacy behind for themselves. This book would really resonate with Jean-Luc Picard.
I don't know what kind of trouble you're planning to get into. Maybe if you're lucky, it will kill you first.
He flies his ship with a 3D hologram interface, and props to Ryan Britt at Inverse for catching this Easter egg. In the classic DS9 episode The Visitor, a future Dr. Bashir says,
I haven't worked a two-dimensional control panel in a long time. How do we manage?
Which implies that in the year 2372, holographic controls have become the standard. Rios is being treated by an EMH, or emergency medical hologram. On Star Trek Voyager, an EMH was a main character on the show and was modeled after his creator, Louis Zimmerman. But I guess on non-Starfleet ships, you can make them look like yourself. I would make mine look like Smokin' Doc Coddle from Battlestar Galactica. How about you? Who would your hologram doctor look like? His EMH fanboys about Picard listing his resume.
Chief contact with a Q continuum.
And this was all the way back in Encounter at Farpoint Station, the very first episode of Next Generation.
Arbiter of succession for the Klingon Empire.
Picard was also named the Arbiter of Klingon Succession in Reunion. Basically, he was an impartial party who had to choose the next leader of the Klingon Empire.
Savior of Earth from Borg invasion.
And Picard stopped a Borg invasion in Star Trek First Contact, but full credit goes to Data for actually killing the Borg Queen.
Resistance is futile.
The man even worked alongside the great Spock.
And they also name-dropped Spock after Picard helped him attempt to unify Romulus and Vulcan in the episode Reunification. Anyways, let's move on to the Borg ship, where we are reintroduced to Hugh, the first Borg to leave the collective that we know of. And this was all the way back in I, Borg.
Resistance is not futile.
The last time we saw Hugh, he was leading a band of Borg separated from the collective.
Perhaps in time, we will learn to function as individuals and work together as a group.
Now it makes total sense that he would be leading the effort to disconnect more people from the Borg. When he was first separated, the Enterprise crew couldn't remove many of his components without hurting him. But as we saw in the last episode, this practice has been refined, such as 7 of 9 on Voyager. Now, like 7, there are just a few Borg implants on his face and an artificial eye. You can even see the scars where his facial implant was removed. He takes Soji to see Ramda, who's an expert on Romulan myth. or as she would call it,
The news.
I like this little detail.
Traditional Romulan houses always have a false front door that's never used.
Because it reinforces that Romulans keep a lot of secrets.
Could put the word secret in front of almost any aspect of Romulan culture.
Also, it calls back to the clue within a clue from episode 2.
Some actual clue that lay tucked inside a false clue, as it were.
And there's several clues here about what's happening with the big mystery of the series. One, that Ramda doesn't see mythology as myth, she sees it as fact. When she turns over the card of the sister, she immediately recognizes that Soji is a twin and calls her,
You are Sentinel! You are the destroyer!
This is obviously an old Romulan prophecy about AI destroying their culture.
She's the end of all. She's the destroyer.
And this prophecy is most likely why the Zhat Vash hate synthetics to begin with.
Noticed the complete absence of any form of artificial life in Romulan culture.
Something happened in their past that warned them about synthetics, and especially two synthetic twins.
But at the heart of the Zhat Vash mission was a deep, unassuageable loathing. Hate and fear and pure loathing for any form of synthetic life.
Ramda's first words,
I remember you from tomorrow,
indicate that she has somehow seen this prophecy firsthand. Well, how? Well, that gets us into clue number 2.
You encountered this cube. You were assimilated. But then something went wrong. What caused the submatrix collapse?
Now, we also know that these Romulan disordered are
The only Romulans ever assimilated, as far as I know.
So the Borg try to assimilate Romulans, and this immediately causes their submatrix to collapse and the cube to fail. Now that's interesting. This implies some kind of connection between Romulans and the Borg, maybe even a shared history. We've never found out where the Borg came from. There's a cool fan theory that they're descended from V'ger, but that's never been confirmed. So what if, a long time ago, Romulans tried to create AI, but then that AI became the Borg? And then somehow they sent them on a slow journey to the Delta Quadrant that took thousands of years. Then they arrive in the Delta Quadrant, they wake up, and they start assimilating people. But also it looks like that the Romulans hardwired a safety switch in their DNA that would keep them from being assimilated by their creations. And look, I know that the Voyager episode Unity featured an assimilated Romulan, so this isn't quite canon, but they'll find a way to write around that. Like how they explained the different Romulan foreheads in this episode.
Because he's a stubborn northerner like you.
Now, this idea that all of this was determined by prophecy could also explain the name of the synth that caused the Mars attack, F8, or Fate.
Which sister are you? The one who dies, or the one who lives?
As for how Rama knows about Daj and her sister, there are only two options I can think of. One, that Soji time travels to the past and appears to ancient Romulans. Two, that the AI that became the Borg was so advanced that it predicted the twins' existence. Or three, good old space magic.
What does God need with a starship?
But the biggest clue might be this disordered Romulan who appears in the very first episode. That's your mom. Anyways, if you have a theory about the Borg and the Romulans, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. And by the way, can we all just assume that Alison Pill's character is actually a Romulan spy in disguise? I mean, she is, right?
You're just gonna let Agnes here hitch a ride on your top secret mission? You didn't even ask me to run any kind of security check, not even the most basic.
And anyway, I'm a terrible liar.
Of course.
And finally, this is really too obvious to be an Easter egg, but it's a cool moment. The episode ends with the original theme of Star Trek: The Next Generation playing, as Jean-Luc finally gets to travel into space with his new crew. And of course, he says,
Engage.
So what did you guys think of the episode? Let me know in the comments below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.